My sisters and brothers, may the Lord give you peace. Happy Easter. Thank you for joining us. Now, this is it. This is the biggie. And I'm always careful with my sports metaphors, but this is the World Series, this is the Super Bowl, this is the NCAA final, all rolled into one. This is it. This is the day the Lord has made. And how many days are in Easter? 50. So this is one big, long celebration, yes? We keep celebrating Easter and celebrating God's presence, God's life, and God's love. And really, the key here is what we're about is celebrating the mystery of God's love. That God, in God's own goodness, continued to love us, even though Jesus was betrayed, had been denied, had been crucified, had been killed. God's love prevails. God's love abounds. And so Jesus entered into this experience in love for us and for God. And we need to keep that in mind because many people have looked at this and said, this was about an atonement. This was to appease an angry God. But is an angry God love? That's sort of contradictions, isn't it? So it's not to appease God. It's not to make an atonement for anything. It's rather of the love that God has for us, God would not allow death to hold Jesus. And because of the love Jesus has for us, he enters this experience of death, giving himself freely and lovingly to us and for us. Now, among my favorite Easter movies, along with The Robe, The Ten Commandments, Ben-Hur, and Jesus of Nazareth, is the movie Moonstruck. Now, you might think that's a little surprising. Well, I think if you've seen it, it stars Cher as Loretta Castorini, Vincent Gardenia, and Olympia Dukakis as her parents, Cosmo and Rose Castorini. And death is an obsession in the film. It starts off, remember, if you recall with the first scene, at a close-up of a dead body in a casket. Funerals, of course, are a part of life. Johnny Camilleri, Loretta's boyfriend, is going back to Sicily because his mother is dying. An old woman puts a curse on his plane that it fall into the ocean because her sister who's on the plane stole the man she loved 50 years ago. Several times throughout we hear Vicky Carr singing, "It must be him, oh dear God, it must be him, or I shall die, I shall die." Loretta's father doesn't like to sleep anymore because, quote, "it's too much like death." Loretta's husband was killed by a bus, and so every so often a bus passes across the screen. Loretta's going to be married again, and so she and her father go to the bedroom to tell Rose. They wake her, and Rose's first words, which is what comes out of any Italian if you wake them up, "Who died?" Rose says to her father-in-law, who keeps talking, taking food from the table to feed his dogs, "Old man, you give one more piece of my cooking to those dogs, I'm going to kick you till you're dead." Loretta asks her mother, "Why is Dad so cheap?" Rose says he wasn't always cheap. He thinks if he holds on to his money, he'll never die. Cosmo is cheating on Rose. One night, Rose is sitting there waiting for him to come home. He walks in, and Rose says to him, "Cosmo?" "Yes, Rose. I'm going to tell you, no matter what you do, you're going to die." "Thank you, Rose. You're welcome." And of course, there is the death of Mimi in the opera La Bohème. The thing is, throughout the movie, we are able to laugh at death. Why? Because something more powerful keeps breaking into where death has come. There's that wonderful scene with Loretta's uncle, Sam Capamaggio. He's in about his mid-60s, and he's looking out the bedroom window one night at the full moon, and his wife Rita wakes up and wonders what he's doing. And she's looking at him and she says, "You know what? In that light, you look like you're 25 years old again." And at that moment, Mr. Capamaggio starts walking very slowly back to the bed with this wonderful smile on his face. And crawling back in, his wife starts to chuckle and says, "What are you doing?" And then she starts to laugh. "What are you doing?" The next day, in their little Italian grocery store, he's singing, "Isn't it romantic? Rita says, you were a lion last night. And you, he says, you were a lamb. But most importantly, how many times do we hear the phrase in the film, Ti amo, I love you? And that's resurrection. God continued to say to his Son, I love you. God related to Jesus even in death. The relationship survives death. And so for us, at death, there is nothing more a person could choose. At death, one becomes nothing. But in our death, in our becoming nothing, now for the first time, the love of God becomes everything. And that is resurrection for us. The relationship I had with God in this life, God wants to continue it. But don't put resurrection off, of course, into your future. Easter is about letting God love you back, right? Letting God's love back into our lives now. Letting new life replace the death and disease that we may have allowed into our lives. Easter calls us to let go of what we think keeps us safe, to leave our tombs, and there are all kinds. But that means change. And as we know, the only people who welcome change are babies with wet diapers. Yet Easter calls us to leave the tomb. The tomb is empty, embrace new life. My brothers and sisters, this overture of love began at Christmas, crescendos at Easter, touches us in our baptism, nourishes us every week in a little piece of bread, leading us to the moment to where God's love becomes everything to us. So, 50 days of Easter, and the key, celebrating God's love, of letting God's love back into our lives a little more than maybe I have in the past. Discovering, as Mary Magdalene discovered this morning, a love that will have the last word, because it keeps saying to us, and will never stop saying to us, Ti amo, I love you.